Awesome. Well, I'm super excited today to be joined by Alec Shannon. And maybe, Alec, to kick us off, you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much, Mel, for having me today. I'm someone who I consider a bridge builder with a global perspective. So I'm coming to this conversation today as someone who's spent my career um, building bridges between research and practice, and also between countries, and increasingly between the technical world of WASH, which stands for water, sanitation, and hygiene, and the humans behind those systems. I'm starting my career mainly in academia. I tackled some complex research about water and sanitation and turned that into policy briefs for practitioners and governments to use in their policies. And then I moved into managing large level surveys, so data collection across multiple countries. The number one country that I worked in for many years was India, which is also where I did all of my thesis work for my master's. And that was all about understanding demographics. So, how populations are growing over time and what services do they need to meet them as they grow? And do people really have access, or don't they, to basic services like clean water and toilets? I have also, throughout my career, focused on menstrual health and hygiene. And that work really was pivotal for opening my eyes to a lot of the inequalities that exist,
Mhm.
not only in low and middle income countries, but right here in a high income country in the US, around how infrastructure is built and managed and who it is built for. So it taught me that we desperately need more women in decision making roles in what is still a very male dominated sector overall. So I'll stop there.
Well, I mean, such a diverse background, but all kind of touching on that human element of WASH, which is obviously core to making it successful. And I am super interested to get into what you mean by it being male dominant, what sector you're talking about. But maybe to kick us off, we can talk a little bit. I know you gave a brief overview of what WASH stands for, but going a little bit deeper around what WASH really is and the disparities that you're witnessing around the world.
Yeah, so WASH is water, sanitation, and hygiene. You'll often see it written in all capital letters, like you wash your hands or you do your laundry, your washing. Some people actually do a big W and a small A. Both ways are accepted in our sector, but it stands for all of the invisible systems, the infrastructure that makes modern life possible. So when you wake up in the morning and you go to the tap to brush your teeth, you expect when you turn the handle that clean, potable, like drinkable water is going to come out instantly. And you'll use a toilet that flushes your urine or your poop away safely. You'll wash your hands with soap at the sink afterwards, hopefully. COVID should have taught you that hand washing is one of the ways that you can prevent infectious disease from spreading. So, folks, wash your hands. Um, all of this seems like normal and accepted to us, but it actually represents centuries of engineering and investment
Mhm.
in those systems that we, in many ways, take for granted. But the
Yeah, I
reality is very different around the world, right?
yeah, I've seen some figures that say over 3 billion people lack those things that we do take for granted here in North America.
Yeah, so if you break it out by water versus sanitation, the figures look a little different. Globally, we've seen a lot more progress, a little bit faster on drinking water access
Hmm.
and what we consider safely managed, which means the water is clean when it reaches the tap, it's available when they need it,
Hmm.
and it's free from contamination. So that's 2.1 billion people that are still lacking that level of safely managed water around the world. And for sanitation, it's worse. It's
Yeah.
about It's not double exactly, but like 1.5 times. So over 3 billion, around 3.4, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure is the latest figure. So that means they have clean toilets, they're safely treated, like a wastewater system or an ecological
Yeah.
sanitation system. And that actually keeps the waste from making its way back into the environment, which is how water becomes contaminated or recontaminated, even. So that's
Yeah.
why we want that safely managed, like bit to
Yeah.
be highlighted. But during COVID, like I mentioned earlier, we also learned about hygiene, which is not usually included in the conversation as much, but hand washing with soap prevents disease transmission. And if you're going to a hospital or an urgent care clinic, you're going to want to see your clinician with gloves on and hands washed and, all of those infection control measures in place. And that is also not the case for a number of countries around the world. They don't
Yeah.
have, full access to safely managed drinking water at their healthcare facilities. And, the nurses and doctors do not always have access to hand washing and or personal protective equipment. So those pieces all come together to create, sustainable, effective, and healthy systems for everyone.
Such a big issue, and it's something that needs attention. And again, I think we take it for granted because it's something that in the developed world, we assume is what everyone has, but isn't the case, but has such an awesome opportunity for easily preventable communicable diseases.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thinking about the Sustainable Development Goal 6 really aims to ensure access to water and sanitation for everyone. And I'm curious how you think we're doing towards this target.
Well, I mean, it's not just how I think we're doing. I think, yeah, I think it's pretty transparently out there that we are not going to achieve universal access to water and sanitation by 2030. That's coming from, the Joint Monitoring Program, who is the global monitoring body for water and sanitation around the world. SDG 6 is ambitious, and I think it needed to be to kind of push people, especially governments and policymakers, to the next step of providing sustainable and equitable services. How we're doing is a bit more of a mixed story, and it's also nuanced because there's been a lot of global upheaval, um, economically and politically. COVID really took governments around the world by surprise and also really interrupted, services and systems right here in the US. So you can imagine how long an interruption like that can last over time. But on the positive side, I think, I started my career right alongside the SDGs, so it's kind of an interesting, you know, way for me to look back on what's changed in the last like 12 to 15 years. But I've seen a lot of innovation taking place. There's a lot more focus on communities installing solar powered water like systems to actually pump the water
Hmm.
up,
Yeah.
instead of using like hydraulics, which was kind of normal when I started in the sector. And there's a lot more towns and townships that are adopting what we call like smart technology. So even using AI to help them detect leaks in the system. There's, of course, schools that are focused on building menstrual health and hygiene friendly facilities for girls to stay in class. But at the current rate of progress, which is where, the sobering bit comes in, we need to work a lot faster than we are on both water and sanitation to actually achieve SDG 6. It gives me hope through my current work, which is with a global practitioner network across over 50 countries. We see solutions continuing to emerge. For instance, maintenance models that keep systems running for decades, and they have the data to back that up because they've been tracking it and going back and kind of checking themselves to make
Hmm.
sure that they're delivering services at a level that is safe. Um, there's cities around the world that are figuring out how to make sanitation financially sustainable, doing marketing approaches and really scaling up alongside government to build supply chains and get that demand like out there,
Mhm.
and entrepreneurship networks. So these are blueprints that are and can be adopted elsewhere. But I want to just say for the record that we don't need to just build more infrastructure. A lot of donors still focus on toilets, taps, hand washing stations, pumps. Um, you need to focus on the infrastructure that lasts, that communities can maintain, and that serves everyone. So, this is where we come back to the issue about women and how infrastructure is designed, because not only women, but also people with disabilities, any marginalized groups.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that it's a really good call out. And what I am aware of is the undue burden that is on women and girls and how often they're the ones that are, taking on the household chores that are related to water. And so if, for example, the infrastructure is a mile walk away, the safety and the other hazards that they're putting themselves in danger of by going to collect that water and what that looks like. So it's definitely a bigger and more holistic conversation than just the infrastructure to have access.
Yep.
So I would say that's a great segue to what are some of the main wash challenges that we haven't already talked about or that you want to go deeper on? And how do you think place-based solutions and having these more inclusive conversations are integral for this to really be more successful and to reach those people that don't currently have wash access?
Yeah, so I think when we focus on, topics of like equity and inclusivity, we're thinking about fairness,
Hmm.
and actually bringing people up to the same level, giving them the same access, meeting them where they are if they have disabilities or other, challenges. But it's also more effective to design our programs that way. And I'll give you an example. So if you are an engineer designing a school toilet block, we'll hypothetically say, we're in a sub-Saharan African country. If your design team is all men, and statistically likely that it will be at least 80% men,
Hmm.
you will probably build a perfectly functional toilet, which is all well and good. But we have seen that you tend to miss challenges that don't affect your demographic, right? So women, especially, and girls need things like privacy. They need to be able to close the door and lock it. They need to have, a door that completely covers and doesn't have gaps in it so that, there's peeking through. They need good lighting. They need disposal systems, at least a trash can, but something, even more contained would be nice as well. And of course, running water, because a big part of menstruating is also needing to clean your hands and your body. So that's critical. And when girls don't have all of those pieces of the functioning and equitable toilet block, we find that their dignity suffers, and because of that, they start missing school days or they drop out of school altogether after puberty. So that's more than half of, the potential of our population that's effectively being cut off because we didn't design infrastructure that works for them. Um, but if you actually take that and apply it to a high income country, we see the same design problems, which you've ever tried to change a baby's diaper in a men's restroom. I'm sure the dads out there can understand this conundrum. Um, they might not have a changing station,
Yeah.
or you might have to put them on the counter. The sink may or may not be close to you, or the trash can may or may not be close to you. There's also issues with navigating public toilets in wheelchairs. Do
Hmm.
they have a ramp? Is the infrastructure low enough for them to be able to, move out of their wheelchair onto the toilet or to the sink? Um, so parent friendly, disability friendly, or even friendly to women's needs. We've made progress in recent years, but the issue we bring the same. challenges.
Yeah.
And we're not just building the infrastructure, we're building in what I call our blind spots.
And I think it's, to your point, if the designer is designing for what works for them, there are probably huge gaps that they're overlooking. And then those people that would benefit from the more inclusive design are suffering as a result of not having a seat at the table and not being the
Right.
engineer who happens to replicate the model around the world, which is
Yeah.
very unfortunate.
So you don't
Um,
want to just transfer technology, you want to transfer knowledge, and you also want the community
yeah,
input from the beginning. You don't want
absolutely.
outsiders just coming in and building what works for them. You need them to be actively involved in the process, contextualizing it, telling you what they want and need, and then designing it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, pivoting a little bit and thinking about water, going back to kind of those billions of people that just don't have access to potable water or to sanitation services, and thinking about the intersection between the water crisis and the climate crisis. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to what climate resilient wash means to you or what it looks like.
Right. So, what is climate resilient wash? It is about building systems, the same infrastructure systems that can handle the climate realities that we're living in. There's more intense storms, there's longer droughts, there's unpredictable rainfall patterns that often leads to flooding, and destruction of infrastructure that sets countries up in this very cyclical loop where they make improvements and then everything gets literally washed away and they have to go back and start at ground zero. So we're seeing, traditional approaches and traditional ways of designing infrastructure are not able to handle these extremes. So communities are having to get creative and that's what I'm seeing, a bit in my work as well. Systems that can switch between different sources, different water sources, depending on conditions, whether it's the wet season or the dry season, for instance. They're also designing flood resistant toilet blocks, but even more so water infrastructure. So a lot of times you'll find, like a water pump in a village setting around the world, and you can actually lift up the infrastructure that's underneath the pump so that when it floods, it doesn't wash away. And then there's also a lot of community savings and insurance programs that can help communities save to afford the repairs when damage occurs due to climate disasters. So the resilience piece isn't just about having stronger infrastructure. It's also about, building the community strength, the financial, the planning, the monitoring,
Mhm.
having them be an integral part so that they, are able to respond usually a lot more quickly than even the local or the national government can after a disaster. And those systems that are owned and managed by the communities tend to recover faster from climate shocks because people already have the knowledge, the resources, and the motivation to get them fixed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very great to hear how it's community led and also it's building a proactive as opposed to a reactive adaptation
Right.
to really be prepared for these extreme weather events that are definitely not going to lessen or become less extreme in the near future. Um, so, kind of to round us out, I'm curious what you hope people contribute or know about to help drive more WASH access and how we can do that, whether that be in our local communities, because obviously, even here in our own country in the US, this is not something that is, perfectly solved or abroad. Like, what does that look like and how can people get involved?
I mean, I think at home here in the US, you can start by appreciating what you have, or even just acknowledging that, turning your tap on and having clean water come out of it, or flushing your toilet and having it take your waste away is really a privilege that is not afforded to the entire world. Um, remember that what you have is a result of massive, massive infrastructure investments and environmental protections, public health regulations.
Mhm.
Those are all things that are unfortunately under fire today. And you will know when these systems fail because for the first time in your life, you might be left without, water when you turn that tap on. So I think, supporting infrastructure funding, supporting water conservation. Like I'm in Minneapolis, which is the city of lakes,
Mhm.
and we have lots of water conservation efforts here in my local neighborhood, including things like, cleaning the sewers, like cleaning the sewer drains so that refuge like leaves and
Mhm.
things like that don't get into them. Being really careful how you salt when it
Yeah.
snows in the winter and trying to use things that don't contaminate the water systems because that all drains into our lakes and streams. And then, of course, looking into what policies ensure that everyone in your community has access. Yeah, pay attention to water issues in your area. Even wealthy communities are dealing with aging pipes, contamination risks. There's equity gaps across,
Yeah.
different neighborhoods in your cities for sure. So get involved in local planning processes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any closing thoughts? I think that you gave us some great tips on what we can do in our communities.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I really want to drive home that like access to wash isn't charity. From someone that works in, the global space, which is increasingly um, criticized and not really with, much standing, is, this is justice. To deliver someone the human right to water and sanitation is actually inscribed, in our international like bylaws, like everyone is guaranteed that right. So when half of the world lacks access to basic sanitation, or when girls are missing school because of inadequate facilities or social kind of cultural issues and challenges, like you said, when girls or even boys are spending hours collecting water instead of contributing to their local economies or going to school, that that does affect us all. So global health is, part of the economic development infrastructure, it's part of gender equity, it's part of climate resilience. Like there's all through lines with WASH. So we're building the foundation for healthy, equitable, and prosperous communities. And it's really work that we all should have a stake in.
Yeah, I
So I'll leave
couldn't.
it there for everyone to ponder on.
As you should. I think that's great thoughts for people to think about and to really understand that we are very privileged for those of us that are living in, North America or the United States. And there's an opportunity for us to get involved in our own community, but to also think about the basic human rights that are part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that WASH is and what that means for us to help promote it and for uh, it to be beyond our borders for sure. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to break down WASH to the basics so that more people can have an understanding of what that means and how they can get involved. And I'm hopeful that we can all become advocates for WASH around the world.